he's not really making a division between a primary and a secondary reality. Like the world as a representation is reality, but it's somehow secondary derivative from the will. And so the will is not a reality, but like it's kind of like a layer. You go back down to its roots or the visible part. And so the roots of reality is the will, and that's like the real thing. That is the essential thing. The thing that the will is really striving after is itself. And so like um, by kind of bringing shorting that circuit of like the will's out into the world of representation, like striving, and you have all these things that are happening and like all these needs. By short circuiting it from rather than going after objects, but going back onto itself, it's like it stops the tension and like the energy goes back into an equilibrium state. Um, uh, which makes a lot of sense, right? Like that's pretty true. You know, you go on a vacation after being really stressed out, you reflect on things, and you can kind of find peace. Or, you know, anytime you relax, like really, you're sort of short-circuiting that process, going back into yourself. You know, anytime you have quiet, you're able to rest, and you know, maybe you meditate, or maybe you just like need to think things through. Like when you see yourself as a will, when you see your inner knowledge of yourself, or like when you see the inner knowledge of like something, you admire something beautiful and you don't really have a particular explanation, you just sort of appreciate it, that short circuits the will and brings you back into like the will in itself. And so like the striving goes away. That's pretty valid. That's true. Um, I would agree with that as a virtuous process, and it's very necessary. Um, but it's not the only story because um, it's basically like saying that work is just terrible, and the only way that I can deal with work is to like have like a compulsive escapist lifestyle when I come home. Like I work really hard and then I just run away from that and like deny it all and like just zonk out. Um, you know, like um, there's a healthy way to like take a step back from life and like do that, but um, if that's all there is, basically you're encouraging people to become heroin addicts um, and just avoid real life. And I think it's also false to the fact that you can find contentment even when you're stressed. Um, and that's the deeper kind of truth there is that um, it's not that you need to run away from meaning to find freedom. You don't need to run away from concepts to find freedom. You don't need to run away from the world, or you don't need to run away from like objects or people or things or tasks or responsibilities to find freedom or liberty from striving. What you need to do is to understand that. Well, I want to get this right. So, um, there's a paradigm between meaning and meaningfulness, and it's foolish to consider uh, the world being meaningless is like the final answer. So, because meaninglessness is just the opposite of meaningful, and meaningful is still a human paradigm. So the opposites are also a human paradigm. And so if you just run away from meaning, you're still in a human illusion. And so you don't really escape the paradigm difference. Or you don't really escape the paradigm of an illusory world. If you just run from the positive version of a paradigm to the negative. And so um, this is where the middle way teaching really comes in handy. And so rather than running away from the individuated parts, all the little conceptualization, the compartmentalization, the fragmentation of life, that it tries to make everything precise and separated and organized, and that's stressful. Rather than running away from that into holism and feeling, which entirely valid, I think that that's a good thing to do. But rather than just doing that, there's a way to see wholes and parts as related, and that they kind of are two poles of a human perspective. And that when you see that parts and wholes are connected, and that meaninglessness and meaningfulness are connected in the same way, then you go past being both too much of an optimist and too much of a pessimist. So if you fall on the positive side, where you are really focused on how everything appears to you, you end up becoming very stressed out and very task-minded, and maybe greedy or maybe controlling or something like that. On the other hand, you become sort of unrealistic and lazy and detached if you run away from the things of the world. And so, it's kind of the Martha and Mary tension in the story with Jesus in the New Testament. Martha is very stressed out and she's cleaning the house and stuff, and Mary is just like chilling with Jesus, like talking about spiritual things. Martha was getting them dinner, but she wasn't able to really find peace because she was stressed. Mary was able to find peace because she was like focused on a spiritual thing, but she wasn't able to feed them because she was just sitting there listening and talking. Really both are necessary to keep each other going. And so when you understand that they are connected, both in a paradigm of this is a human reality, and sort of two ends of a pendulum, that they're connected in a way that is sort of beyond this or that sort of paradigms, where it's something that you can conceptualize, but it's not an ultimate conceptualization, like where you can't fully explain it. It's like something you have to know from actually experiencing the connectedness of those two ends of a spectrum. That when you see that, and that you see that that's just a human thing, you go past the optimism of affirming the outside world and doing all of its demands, the objectivism, or like not, that's probably not going to make sense to a lot of listeners. The freedom of the will, or willlessness, like when you move into denial of the outside world, the pessimism toward it. When you move past both of those, you actually understand that everything is meaningful and meaningless, and that reality in itself is what we know, what we can experience, but that is a meaningful reality. That is what matters, but that the striving is a product of that paradigm. Is really what it is a product of that paradigm. It's not a product of just reality being conceptually formulated. Like you don't need to become irrational to find freedom. Like irrationality is definitely part of that process. Like you need to go back into your feelings rather than just like having reasons for doing things. But really, it's you cannot find lasting freedom unless you transmute between both of those processes. I'm going to talk more about it in the next video.